Those 4 hours, she got 2 parts, 2 distinct, various parts. But what I didn't like about it is that she edited heavily so that I would only be testifying about the things she liked to hear. Couldn't actually share my whole testimony. I didn't like that. But here's where it got very, very interesting. She uploaded it to the servers, and the servers crashed. So they uploaded it again. Servers crashed. They uploaded it up 5 times. Each time the server would crash. This is a YouTube server. Crashing. Would not allow. And so finally they uploaded it to a cloud server. And the physical recording that was on their physical device was corrupt halfway through. So they lost the recording. The 4-hour recording, they lost it. So they had to re-download it, take it through a expensive scrubbing machine to get it scrubbed. And so in January, she calls me, says, we might not be able to release the full interview because a large part of it is corrupted. I said, did you pray over the recording? She's like, no. I said, did you pray when you uploaded it? She's like, no. And I said, did you give the land where the servers are over to God? She says, no. I said, well, then you moron. No wonder. You're getting a heavily spiritual testimony about an exposing what the devil's been using against so many Christians, and you're not praying over it? She's like, oh, right. So they prayed, and just like that, uploaded to YouTube just fine. And she's like, okay, this is a new level. Norm has taken us into a whole new level. The upload went live on the 10th of February, 2022. Significance? It's my wife's birthday. It was her birthday, but it was released before we ever met each other. And so she sees it in March. And she's like, this guy is weird, but I like him. So she's looking around to see where I am. And by that time, Jennifer has reached out to me and says, there's lots of people, they want to be able to connect with you. Do you have a group? And I was like, I got a little Telegram group. It's got like 6 people in it. She's like, well, I got more than 6 and they want to know. I said, all right, well, here's a link. Gave her the link. Within 3 weeks, there's 100 people. I was like, whoa. Okay. This is way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And my wife, Tanisha, was one of them. Except she wasn't my wife at the time. And so she and a mutual friend from Maryland that became very good friends with me, also became mutual friends with Tanisha. And then we also have a friend in South Africa, and the guy from South Africa figured out first, God has set Norm and Tanisha up to be wed. And long story short, we met on a Zoom call on the 3rd of April, 2022. I popped the question on the 12th of April, 2022. We got married on the 20th of May, 2022. We did it fast. And we tell as many people as possible, don't do it that fast unless God said so. But God had directed so many things. So one of the marriage vows, one part of the marriage vows is that I said, in this union, and for every other person that we meet. This is where the devils learn what it means to lose. And the first 2 years, oh, that was a challenge. That was an interesting challenge because the devil wanted to make sure that we lost. And it got to the point that at least 60 times a month, so that's like twice a day, my wife is trying to kick me out. But it's not her. It's a spirit spouse. Spirit spouse recognizes. And that's the other thing about the spirit spouse. Spirit spouse is all about making sure that relationships don't thrive. Oops. My camera is shrinking. It's all about making sure that relationships don't thrive. It's all about making sure that there is hundreds, if not thousands, of arguments. It's all about making sure that if you have sex with someone and they haven't repented for the stuff that they've done, all the things sexually that they have done, you are now late like a pyramid scheme to everything that every person they've thought about or been with. Yeah. So I know for a fact with all of my unions, I've probably got a couple 100 million contracts. She, my wife, is the daughter of a prostitute. She's got several billion contracts. And so when a married couple is trying to be married and they don't lay their life down in every other connection they've ever made, it's the people who drag your name through the mud, treat you like crap, do everything they can to ruin what God has done in their life. And it's not the person. It's the spirit spouse. So all the that's happening in the world, all the fighting, is the spirit spouse. Yeah, this is huge. But just as God gave Israel and Judah a decree of divorce from the old covenant so that he could write them a new one, we also can ask him for a decree of spiritual divorce from every master and spirit spouse we've had contracts with. Ask for a decree of divorce from those blood covenants, contracts, and agreements. And when the decree comes in, all of a sudden the temptation to go backwards is gone forever. That is how it's possible when Jesus said, "Be ye perfect, as I am perfect." Because if you don't have agreements counting against you, if you don't have blood covenants counting against you, if you don't have blood contracts counting against you, then you can be perfect. And then, capstone. Otha Turnbow. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's a pastor of a church in Austell, Georgia. His church is Lionheart Church. He said there is a secret in Matthew 26 where Jesus is trying to get his disciples to pray. Praying for 1 hour is good. Praying for 2 hours is favored. Praying for 3 hours is perfect. And if you're praying for 1 hour in tongues, if you pray for 1 hour today in tongues, it will set you up the next day to have no problems. If you pray for 2 hours, that's now 2 days in advance. If you pray for 3 hours, that's now 3 days in advance. And so I began to try that. I tell you, there were so many levels of arguments that used to occur in this house. But when I began to pray from 9:30 to 12:30, 9:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m., the level of arguments died. The level of actually being able to work with each other through the roof. The level of those who began to speak and actually be understood. Absolutely amazing. And then, most astonishing of all, there are times that my wife is on that time of the month and I can't tell because all those moods don't show up because of praying 3 hours a day. All right, your turn. Let me fix my camera.
Hey, want to hear raw supernatural conversations with people who call me every single day, sometimes weeks or even months before they share their story on the show? Up until now, I've kept those early calls tucked away on the hard drive, but now I'm finally sharing them with members as a small thank you for supporting this podcast. And that's just one of the perks. You'll also get to join me live on future interviews. You'll get to listen in and even ask questions at the end. Spots are limited, so don't wait. Hit that join button below or head to godsvoiceday.com/join for more information. And now let's get back to the show. All right, Norm, we're back from a quick break. Wow, you just unloaded a ton, and I'm trying to process everything.
And now you understand why I had this deliberation. Do I want to be God's voice today?
You know, when you called me just earlier today during my 15-minute phone call, I knew, I was like, okay, we got to just record the whole thing because there's so much that you just dropped in that alone. Interesting that you had, first of all, let's back it up at the very beginning. So I'm just going to go through all my notes. And I know I'm going to miss a ton, and people in the comments probably going to criticize me for it. They're like, Vladimir, all these questions you could have asked, but you didn't. So you asked them in the comments, and then we're going to come back for a part 2. But interesting that you went to VBS at age 7, and you accepted Satan in church. How is that possible? And you know, it's interesting because like over the weekend, I released a video. I was telling you earlier about Levi was talking about how he went to hell and you saw children there as young as 12, 13, right? And so like, and people gave me so much hard time around this idea that there might be children in hell. And so you're saying at age 7, you have made a conscious decision to follow Satan. If you were to die at age 7, do you think you would end up in heaven or hell?
Hell. Easy. Because
people had beef with 12?
Yes, the age of so many people say the age of accountability is the age of 12 because that's when Jesus went to the temple. If you know Jewish culture, that's not why. That was just a year that his parents went to the temple. He'd gone to the temple many other times. It's just at the age of 12 he'd been there. But that's not to say that's the age of accountability. The age of accountability is when the child cognitively says, "No, I don't want to serve Jesus."
Well, and you know, if you think about it, like I come from a third world country where we grow up much faster. I remember age 9, 8, I would take subways and trains to go to soccer practice. My parents didn't know I was part of clubs. You know, I always jokingly say in Eastern Europe, people quit drinking at age 7, 8, right? Or smoking and drugs. But it's, you know, kids grow up there much faster because of hardships, responsibilities, different things. And so when I moved to the United States, I remember how shocked I was that kids, 18 years old, acting like like we were acting, we were like 9, and so to me it was shocking. So the whole age thing, it's not as important, I think, as just your maturity level and all the other things, right? But you said something in the beginning. You said about age of 3 you had an experience, and we can get into it if you want to.
Yeah.
I want to get into it. So can you tell me more about that?
So at the age of 3, I was, crawling around on the ground, and I see a wasp. I asked my dad, "What is it?" And instead of telling me, "This is dangerous, don't touch it," he says, "Find out." And so I put my fingers down, and it walked over my fingers and stitched them. So now I have a fear of wasps and a distrust of authority.
Not a good combination.
And what I didn't realize is that this then formed a level of bitterness against humans, a bitterness against people, and a bitterness against God. So then my ability to understand what God would say out of the Bible was limited because of that bitterness. I had made a judgment. I decided, well, now I can't trust people. Well, now I can't trust God to bring me. And the moment that I say I can't trust, we humans tend to see that as, well, I just said something. No, God just said something and an earth was created. We create with our word. And so this idea that some way, somehow, we aren't creating something with what we say, it doesn't matter how old you are. I'm reminded of a story of a woman who, she was in a similar homeless shelter as to what I was in when I was 27, and she was required to forgive her mother, and she couldn't. Every time she thought about forgiving her mother, she'd just have these horrible nightmares, and she couldn't figure out where the nightmares were coming from. And so the staff began to ask her, what kind of nightmares are you talking about? And she said, "I keep waking up coming out of a plastic bag, a black plastic bag, and I don't understand why." Took some digging for the staff to find a living relative, and the living relative is, of course, shocked to hear this story, because when this young woman had been born, her mother couldn't take care of her, so she put her into a black plastic bag and threw her in a dumpster. Doesn't matter how old you are. Records are made. And so she is rescued from this black plastic bag as a couple-day-old infant, because the bag is literally cut open and she's lifted out of this bag. And that's her nightmare for 27 years until she forgave her mother. So I had made a vow at the age of 3. I can't trust people, and I can't trust my father. I can't trust people in authority. Not only did that set a level of bitterness against people and God, it also caused a flip. Like, I'd say something and people would hear it twisted, and how I'd say it, how they'd hear it is not the same thing. Rebecca Brown has a word for it. She calls it boxes on the mouth and on the ears that discombobulate the information so that how it's said and how it's heard is not the same way. But it's actually got to do with a vow. When you say "I can't because," and the "because" is anything other than what God said, it's a judgment. And then when when you're trying to talk to an individual and they start to do as you have vowed, you're going to stay against. Now you have this urge and you don't know where it's coming from that you cannot associate with that type of person. You can't figure out why. It's because your body remembers the vow. Your mind might not, but your body does.
What's
And
it?
so,
The body keeps the score, so to speak, right?
very much so. And that's why in physiology, which is not psychology, is of the physical. In physiology, they have discovered that a woman who has multiple sex partners, the DNA of all that sperm, whether she has used protection or not, if she's touched them, the DNA mixed. If she's kissed him, she gave him a blowjob. It's a mix of DNA. And so if there is any level of mixing of DNA, all of the demonic agreements within the whole bloodline is now connected to that person. And so the level of discernment that a person needs to have to be able to see what is of God and what isn't is not there if they have not gone through deliverance. Because it's not just the deliverance of what they've done in their life. It's the deliverance of what exists in the tree.
When you say deliverance, you're referring to like actually reaching out. You know, some churches do have deliverance ministries. More of a full deliverance like that, or like a self-deliverance?
Self-deliverance going all the way back to Adam. And there's a amazing woman by the name of Natasha Grubich, who wrote a book. The book is called Repentance, Cleansing Your Generational Bloodline, and sells it on Amazon for $22. In that, she writes about how every person in the various levels of generations and DNA can be traced back all the way back to Adam and Eve when they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, this idea that everything that happened in the Bible you're not responsible for is a lie. It's a ginormous lie. And the specific reason why the devil feeds people that lie is so that they don't have the authority. Because when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they ate knowledge. They didn't eat a fruit. They ate knowledge. So when they ate that knowledge, they began to see in good and evil, but they could no longer see by life. It's like a question I posed to this Jehovah's Witness who could not answer. I said, how were Adam and Eve kept alive in the garden before the fall? Well, the trees in the garden. No. That's for food. That's not for life. How were they kept alive? Eating from the tree of life. So they could see the world through the life of God. So they weren't allowed to go back and have any more from the tree of life, because that would mean they'd have eternity plus do what they want. That's why the angels were there, to keep them from having eternal life and also do what they want.
You know, it's interesting, Norm. I was telling you earlier how I had a podcast interview scheduled around this time, and how supernaturally got canceled. The person just like all of a sudden couldn't show up. And then at the same time, I was getting, I think that actually happened on our phone conversation earlier. And then I'm like, well, what do you have going on in about an hour? You want to get together and do a podcast interview? Because my day is wide open.
And that doesn't happen ever, right?
Not like that. Let's get back to the whole experience at age 7, right? You were talking about the church, that they only prayed over like the land. But it's interesting that you attribute that to the prayer because they changed these rules for just that short season, and just in that
that one
season.
year.
That's interesting that everything went down for you. But the voices. So when you were talking about the voices, like it kind of sounded like Lord of the Rings, you know?
That's what a couple people. Gollum.
I was like, interesting. Why did you follow the one, not Satan, not the other? What appealed to you more about that offer at age 7?
What kid actually wants to do what their two parents tell them all the time?
Yeah, definitely not my kids.
But here's where it gets chilling, because when I was 15 years old, I lost a cousin to drowning. The first cousin that had ever died. He was not yet 14. If Satan can't get it in one family, he'll get it in another.
So do you feel responsible for that one? Is that what you're saying?
Yep. But that particular thing also came into fruition when I was 26. I got the news that my grandma, the one who her house was an entire concrete block, that particular grandpa had passed, and then she got remarried. And here's the amazingness of God. The first guy she was married to was a warlock. The second one was a missionary. And so when I got the news that she was getting remarried, I was so excited because she was finally going to be able to have a spouse that was amazing. And I remember I was out walking, and this is well before I knew anything about the court of heaven, anything about the counsel of God, anything. All of a sudden, I'm in a vision, open vision, and I'm sitting at a table. There's God on this side, there's the devil right across from me, and Jesus on this side. And God is telling me, so your grandma getting married, the devil has a proposition. I was like, what's up? And he says, she's only allowed to have him for 3 days, and then I get to take his soul because of all the evil that's been done in her family. I said, interesting. You say that. No. The 7 years I served you, she gets that 7 years. And Jesus says, we like sevens around here. You just going to keep it to 7 years? I said, no. 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks. And so he lived, and they were married. They were married, and for 7 years, he was amazingly healthy. And then he started to get sick. Now I have to find the text from my mom because she gave it a particular way. Give me a moment. I need to find it in my messages. I'd asked for 7 years. She got 5 years. And my grandma didn't seek to remarry. God made her remarry. They had 5 years of marriage, and then boom, he was gone. I tried for 2 years to tell her about that story and couldn't. For the span of 2 years, 7 months, 7 weeks. So that it actually came out to that 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks.
Wow. Whew. Another thing you mentioned, being from the Amish community, it's something that was very shocking to me. I can't remember if you mentioned this during our first call or this call. Everything's a blur now. But you mentioned how there are a lot of witches and warlocks in the Amish community, which I assumed that the Amish community was very Christ-like, very religious. And you told me it was quite the opposite, huh?
Very much that. Well, I'll give it this way. In almost the same way that there are so many denominations of Christians, there are so many sects, that's sects, of Amish. And it was always about studying the good book, but the good book was never called the Bible. In fact, when my grandma had passed in 2013, and I went to the funeral, I asked a bishop those 3 questions that I asked you. And of being born physically, yes, they're family. Of being adopted, no, they're not family. Of being born into the family but treating your name like crap, running your name to the mud and leaving the church, are they family? He said no, they left the church. And he asked me if I thought he was going to heaven.